Stephen Mead, the Bullseye Guy, coming to you from Dubai, but the amazing, the infallible, the intriguable Richard Quest. I have the opportunity for a podcast. We tried to do this in Dubai, didn't quite work because of miscommunication on podcast versus vodcast, but I've got him now on camera, coming from New York. I'm in Dubai. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Say hello.
A very good day to you, Stephen, from New York. It's cold, it's miserable, it's not wet. You'll have to excuse me. Oh, as you can imagine, I've got a bit of a sniffle, so that'll happen various times, but that's just the nature of the beast these days when you travel.
Well, it must make you feel like home then if it's cold and wet and rainy out.
Oh, that was a cheap shot.
All right, it'll be the only one as we go on. So, again, greatly honored to have you with the time here. I want to start with a little bit of going backwards. Anybody that knows you from Quest on Business and the amazing amount of travel. Let's go back. What was Richard like as a child, and what did you think you would grow up to be?
Oh, that's easy. There were two things. I either wanted to be, if you ask my late mother, she would have said he wants to be an ice cream salesman. I wanted to sort of sell ice cream. And then growing up, I ran make-believe companies, which is interesting because I don't really have much entrepreneurial spirit. We had a friend of mine and me over the road. We used to sort of do a car brochure and a travel agency. Don't ask me why cars and travel. I had no interest really in cars, but I do believe that was the beginning of my interest and love of travel. This idea of going and seeing places. If you move, I've always worked right from the time when I had a paper round when I was 12, 13. It was actually my sister's. She got the paper round. She did it for about 2 days and then didn't want to do it. So I bequeathed it to me. So I'd worked in I did a paper round, and then I worked in a service station, a garage, pumping gas. And then I worked in bars serving and in restaurants. So I've always had this work ethic of doing things.
And where did you grow up, and was your family entrepreneurial? Where did the spirit of that come from?
No. My late grandparents were both entrepreneurial. They both had businesses, but my parents were not particularly. No, Dad was a doctor and then a lawyer. He defended doctors, medical legal work. Grew up in Liverpool in northwest England. And then when I was 10 or 11, we moved to Leeds in the middle of the country in Yorkshire and lived there until I was 21. I went to my home university. And then it's a combination of Nashville, Tennessee, London, New York, London. And pretty much I've spent the last 25 years living between New York and or London.
Wow. And so from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if your family wasn't entrepreneurial per se, how and when did you know you had that spirit, and how did they take some of the early...
I don't, Stephen. That's the point. I don't. I couldn't sell water in the desert. At least I've always been told I couldn't. I did one of those psychosomatic tests a few years ago for a program, Quest on Money. And it asked, were you entrepreneurial? And the answer came back, no, I wasn't. I wasn't Richard Branson or anybody like that. What I have a talent for doing, or I did, is being able to pull the levers in large organizations to get things done. So my projects always got off the ground. I was able to get the trip or get the project or get the program made because I had the skill, and it's an underrated skill. I'll blow my own trumpet here. Sure. It's not bureaucracy. It's knowing how to make a big company work for you, to get the things done that you need to do. So you don't get too frustrated by the bureaucracy. You do know the right person to go and talk to. You do know exactly the moment at which to put that budget request in. And there is a skill and an art to doing it. And for some reason, I seem to be able to do it quite well.
And that's a skill that obviously you've honed with where you are now and what you're doing, which we'll get to. Quite fascinated, because for me in college, I joked that I was unhirable, but I didn't know it till many years later. I would take assessment tests and nobody would hire me because I didn't fit in a box. So what was college? Yeah.
Look, go back to school and I was the kid who made the most noise. Go back to school. I was well liked, but I was always the one that was the, you know, oh, not Richard again. I did amateur dramatics. I did, you know, loved all of that sort of stuff. And then when I get to 10 or 11, I start doing what we have in Britain called hospital radio. These are radio stations, little stations just for the hospital, playing patients' requests. To be honest, it's often more an excuse for people to work in radio than what the patients want, but I did it. And if you, I've forgotten the author's name, The Outliers.
The Outliers, and not The Tipping Point. The Tipping Point in that Malcolm? Malcolm Gladwell?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you an edit point there. And if you take, for example, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, well,
Sure.
I got them. I mean, I got there because I'd done 10,000 hours from hospital radio to local radio to university radio. So by the time, and in WRVN in Nashville, so by the time I get to join the BBC at age 23, 24, I've already got my, you know, I've done my apprenticeship, so to speak. But I think that's putting myself down a bit. You know, that's something I love. Broadcasting is always been something I love.
So this is what I'm interested in, Richard, and fascinated by, because there's a gap. You went from college to doing these things to all of a sudden now you're interning in radio. What was your first foray into radio then, or how did you
Hospital
discover
radio
that?
when I was 13, playing patients' requests. And I do hospital
Really?
radio from 10, 11, 12, 13, well, 13, 14, 15, right the way up to 20 when I'm doing university radio. I'm also doing my law degree, by the way, and my, you know, other things. But there's always an element of radio and broadcasting in there. And I can trace it back. Primary school in Liverpool.
Really?
Yeah. It was Hanukkah, the Jewish Festival of Lights, of course, in December, and BBC Radio Merseyside had come to record the school choir singing Hanukkah songs. And I remember as if it was yesterday, I was very disappointing. All it turns, it was a man with a microphone. And I thought, yeah, this isn't very exciting. But I remember listening to it on air. And it was one of those first things. I've got too much headroom here. Sorry, you can take the boy out of television, but you can't take television out of the boy. And I remember hearing on the radio the announcer saying, children from the choir from King David Primary School with songs for Chinooka. And that was my first example. Chinooka, yeah, that was my first example, and you better get it right.
Sure.
Get at least that bit right. And from there, it was just onwards and upwards. And there's something delicious about radio. There is something magnificent about it. I still listen to the radio in the morning. It's still my preference over television. I can still enjoy a play on the radio because it allows me my mind to go with it.
Describe that though. If you were to close your eyes and describe radio and what you like about radio, what would that sound like?
It's an intimacy. It's an intimacy with the listener, which is often lost by many people in television. You know, I think it was Queen Victoria, speaking of her Prime Minister Balfour, Gladstone, who said he always addresses me as if he's addressing a public meeting. And that was the sort of, too many people on television address people as if they're talking to a public meeting. And it's not. It's an intimate conversation broadcasting. It is reaching, you're not talking, hello, everyone.
Right.
You're talking to the viewer who's watching you now. And in radio, that's a lot easier to imagine because you've got a conspiratorial quietness there. You're not projecting. The other problem with television, of course, is you have to beat, I think it's called the fourth wall or the fifth wall, which is the screen. You have to punch through it. Otherwise, you're not really making much of it. Whereas with radio, it's a lot more intimate. Can be.
And so in the early days, when did you know you really enjoyed it, and B, when did you start realizing you're pretty good at it?
Almost immediately, I knew I liked it. Almost immediately, I knew I liked it. As for when I realized I was pretty good at it, I would say about 2 years ago. And
And where was there an inflection point where you went, wow, I'm pretty good at this?
yeah, I think there was, where you suddenly realize, I mean, look, we're all familiar with the imposter syndrome and the sabotage syndrome and all of those things. And I think when you're in a profession like radio and television, where there's always somebody who wants your job, and there's always somebody who you admire who's better than you. And I've got lots of people who I can think of. My school friend, Chris, who we started in hospital radio together. He has worked his way up through both the BBC and ITV. And he is a much more consummate broadcaster than me. And you watch these people and you just admire their ability effortlessly to broadcast. But then at the same time, I sort of realized, well, actually, breaking news, I'm pretty good at doing it. And I think that that's not immodest.
Yeah.
Because I think to deny it is false modesty.
Well, and that's where I was trying to go, because there's the humility that I've learned with you is really interesting. And people see you, and again, we'll get to the television side of where you are now, but the imposter syndrome is, you think it's always there, but you also work hard at your craft, right? I mean, you've never taken it for granted with the amount of time and effort you've put into it. I think people see it.
There are skills that one uses now that one got from the beginning. I started in the days when you still physically cut tape with a razor blade. That gave, I can listen to an edit, or I can listen to a potential TV edit, and I can tell you if it's going to work before it's even been done.
Wow.
Because years of cutting the bloody tape, splicing it together. You take the old breath with the new word, so it masks the whole thing. I did all of that. And over the years, but I do love, here's the other side of that coin. I love an intern or a junior producer coming up and saying to me, let's have a go at doing this. And when I say I don't think it'll work, they say, well, let's try it anyway. Yeah. And it works.
Amazing.
Because the danger is you get old and wizened. We've done that, did that. There's that lovely bit in Devil Wears Prada where Meryl Streep says, do you think it's too much like and Tucci says, the La Croix from June? I thought that, there's just that wonderful bit, and you can get a bit like that.
Yeah.
By the way, that has one of my favorite lines in that movie.
Which is?
Tales of your incompetence do not interest me. Love
it. With the radio, then when was the transition to television? Was it straight to television? Was it news? How did you make that?
No. You're skipping over a good 10 years of law.
Well, please, then let's talk about the 10 years.
Well, not 10 years, whatever. My father said to me, look, yeah, of course you can do journalism. You'll have the best dinner party stories and the smallest car parked outside. But you can do it if you want, provided you get a profession under your belt. So I did law, and I loved law, and I wanted to be a barrister, and I would have enjoyed being a barrister, but I wanted to do journalism, broadcast journalism more. But I did get my law degree. I did get called to the bar in 1984, and then I got a BBC traineeship, and that solidified my direction to go broadcasting journalism.
Then let's talk about the law side for a minute, because I love learning the arc of somebody, because they see you now and don't know about this. What did you like most about law, and what do you think you learned and took from it that helped you in the transition to BBC?
I wouldn't say transition to the BBC. The thing that got me to the BBC was all the previous radio work that I'd done. And no, I think the significance of law is that I think it's one of the best degrees for journalism, because it teaches you forensic thinking in the true meaning of the word. Dissecting, analyzing, but more importantly, even than that, recognizing there are two sides to every argument. Too many journalists today assume that the CEO is a crook, the politician is a liar, and that everybody's bad. And the reality is that what law teaches you is, because you can't win a case, you cannot win a case unless you've started from the position, what's the other side going to say? What's the position of the other side? Does the other side actually have a valid point? Are we fighting the indefensible here? And so consequently, and also you learn from this point from law, everybody has a right to a defense, or, you know, everybody has a right to their day in court.
Sure.
So when I interview a CEO, first of all, I remember he doesn't have to answer my questions. He's chosen to. So courtesy is foremost. Secondly, he's entitled to his point of view. Just because it might be the opposite of the obvious, he's entitled to it. Now, if he tries to tell me black is white, you know, then I'll go for him or her.
Right.
So if she says it was a very good year and the company lost $1 billion, I'll say, well, I'd hate to see a bad one. You know, I mean, but he or she is entitled to say, Richard, it was a good year despite all we faced.
Yeah.
And that's all I look for in an interview with a chief executive or a politician. They're entitled to put their point of view, but they have to do it recognizing the obvious.
And so do you feel, and I would venture to guess the answer, but I wouldn't do it, the law helped you then with the interview and the critical.
You do a few moot court cases. You read the cases in their original judgments in the original. And of course, remember, I wanted to be a barrister, not a corporate lawyer as a solicitor. So I was very familiar with this idea of reading something and working out how are you going to test its weak points. Almost test its weak points to destruction, because you're going to have to face somebody in court, and the other barrister will have done the same thing about your argument.
Yeah.
So I think that, and the law requires not a forensic thought, but it requires rigor. It requires, which is why I am a huge fan of those degrees that require, and it can be in any discipline, so long as it requires rigorous thinking or expression.
Yeah. Well, that's almost a segue. What I was in my mind was, because being a barrister is not only the critical thinking and the words matter, but it's also the presentation. It's the intonation and the presentation and the skill of speaking, isn't it?
Yeah, but what you're saying is, you know, can you dress it up and sell it? Yes, you can up to a point, but a jury might see through it, but a judge won't. A judge will spot, a judge only, and the viewer will as well. If I, you know, people always bang on about. I remember a very famous British interviewer, Sir Robin Day. He once said, "Robin, why do you let people get away when they haven't answered? Why don't you point this out?" And he said, "Because the listener or the viewer can tell. If you've asked it and they haven't answered, and you've asked it again and they haven't answered,
yeah.
I mean, you don't need a man with a red flag to walk in front of you to say, like in the old days, to say he hasn't answered. It's obvious he hasn't. Now, sometimes you want to do it. There's a very famous case, very famous in British television, of Jeremy Paxman asking the then Home Secretary the same question something like 22 times because he didn't answer it. Now, he was making a point.
Right.
But, you know, these are the ways you just have to deal with it.
Interesting. Yeah. And even in today's journalism, I don't think people have the art of the question. And they don't understand the art of words, because the obfuscation of wording is very interesting. Somebody will answer without answering, and then the journalist just moves on, because I don't think they really understand the questions.
Well, there's two things on that. First of all, if it's a live interview, there are time pressures. And you've got other things to answer. And what you don't want to do is particularly in live interview, there used to be a very famous British Foreign Secretary that when he was doing live interviews, he always insisted in doing them at 10 to the hour, 10 to 8. Why? Because he knew at 5 to 8, they had to go to the weather. on radio. So once you're within that window of 2 to 3 minutes before 5 to 8, or a minute,
Yeah.
you can keep going because they can't go for the supplementary.
Yeah,
Because they got to go
because
to the weather.
there's a built-in in cap and window.
Correct. That's
yeah,
changed,
so-
by the way, a lot. That has changed. You put people in different slots now to accommodate that.
Well, and you've transitioned to television magnificently. I'm going to ask you an end question, but I still want to come back because I like going through these arcs. With television and what you do now, what do you prefer? Because you've got the quest on business and the travel and the vignettes and the live interviews. Do you prefer the stories that you create and craft or the actual interviews?
Oh, both. It would be a very dull meal if you only had one course all the time, wouldn't it? I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's the perfect mixture to be able to do a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of the other.
Well, then let's go back. Then how did the transition into television happen? And what did that start?
1990s Business Breakfast on BBC One came along. I was the reporter in New York. I was the Wall Street correspondent. I'd been trained in television. You just move on. You just do it.
Interesting.
I spent many years doing both radio and television for a long time.
And what surprised you most in the difference between radio and television?
Oh, television is logistics. Television is all about logistics. There's a dirty secret for you, Stephen.
Sure.
You know, it's logistics. The logistics of television are in much greater than in radio. Now they've got easier with different equipment and newer equipment and cameras. But first of all, with radio, all there was me and my Ure tape recorder. With television, all there is now, you need a cameraman, you need an editor. You now need to have several people that's going to get it to air. Can you do it with yourself on your iPhone? Absolutely, and indeed I have. And I do that quite often because I have learnt the skills of doing both myself. It takes me back to the radio days. But, you know, shaky vision is not a particularly attractive art. MTV made shaky vision popular in the 2000s, the 1990s and 2000s, but they did it very cleverly. I promise you, TikTok has made it also very sophisticated, but amateurish shaky vision is not really watchable.
Not good.
No, it's not watchable.
Yeah. Let's switch gears again. Outside of Richard Quest, CNN, Quest on Business, the things that people see globally, what are you most passionate about? What kinds of things are out there that you love doing or that would surprise people because they think they know you from what they see?
You mean in my work or in my life?
Either.
Well, the work they see. I think what people would surprise people is just how involved I am in the logistics and the, you know. But I learned this when we launched World Business Report from New York from the BBC in 1995, which was the first daily BBC TV show outside of London, outside of the country. And it was every day, and we had no budget, but we had to find a way of doing it. And so we did it with smoke and mirrors. I sat on an air conditioner and we put a gel on the window and we used an old camera. And this came back to me, by the way, during the pandemic, these skills, because suddenly we had to work from home. And I didn't have the resources because they were being deployed elsewhere. And so I thought, there's got to be a way to do this. And so I already had a machine called a Live View, which is what we've been given months before. It enables you to broadcast high quality easily. But I needed a camera. I know a friend of mine has got a camera that he uses for shooting adult films.
The edge of technology is always porn and gambling.
Correct. So I borrowed it from him, making sure there were no tapes or cards left in it. You really wouldn't have wanted that. And then I connected it up and I had to do it all myself. And it was the start of the pandemic and I was going backwards and forwards to B&H, which is the place in New York where you buy equipment. And it was just like those days in hospital radio. I need that now. No, where's that? Oh, well, within a few days, we were doing Quest Means Business from my living room.
Wow.
Hence the graphics.
Yes.
Then we did it from the roof. Then we did it from my place at the beach. Then we did it from London. And those lessons that we learn now enable us to do Quest Means Business in all the places where we go to. And it's because, and I'm not being immodest here, it's because I have a very strong understanding of logistics and technology to make television. Now, this infuriates the hell out of other people. Infuriates them. Why? Not because they resent me personally, because they resent the fact that they'll say, oh, well, hang on a second. Oh, God, you always cause so much trouble. You're not doing it the normal way we do it. Normally, people have a person who does that, fills in that form. They get 3 other people to do that. And you're trying to roughshod the whole thing over. And I say, well, yes, but if we try to do it the traditional way, we don't have the budget. So we won't do it at all. So you have 2 choices. You either find a workaround or you don't do it. You choose.
And I would think, Richard, because you do so much international travel, I would think it's not just budget. I would think it's logistics of people and execution. You can't bring a massive team with you around the world in the events that you do and the excursions.
No. So everybody who travels with me knows how to do it. So there'll be 2 or 3 of us. It's a very small team. I'll have the backbone of the whole picture. And, you know, we've added a lot of bells and whistles, I'll be honest. If you think back to when we started, when I started, and I said that, in fact, we did the show last week from Cape Town, and I was saying to one of our guests, actually, all we need is the camera, a microphone, and an earpiece to my ear from my cell phone so that I can hear them talk to me. With that, we can do it. Now, we can add on bells and whistles. So now I have return, I can see the program. Now I have a second IFB to my ear. Now I have this, that, and the other. But these are bells and whistles that if you lost them, so
you can still perform.
Absolutely. But you accept you get a bit old and sclerotic, and you get a bit lazy, and you forget how, and you suddenly have a heartburn and a conniption when you realize it's not working, and you're thinking, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this?
All right. So, and I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've been traveling and just got back. On the personal side, that was the business side. I'm curious, what could you share that on a personal side, either passion or hobbies or things outside of the world of Richard Quest that keeps you excited, motivated, or that may surprise somebody? Outside of your love of scarves, of course.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yes, I should have been wearing it. I've hidden it.
Good.
What do I like to do outside of work? Well, my husband and I have a great place by the beach, which we love. You know, we're both, thank goodness, we both wake up early, and nothing's nicer than either working in the garden there or a beach walk just as the sun's coming up. That's a real treat and a pleasure. Other than that, you know, I'm really tedious. I like just basically my own time reading. I don't have this sudden, I'm trying to learn French. I'm trying to learn French, not very well. And I know that the secret to my future happiness is also learning how to do breathing exercises. So I'm trying to do those.
And I have a saying, because my friends, I travel a lot and I don't like to, and they say, oh, you get to travel. I love traveling. I say, no, you love vacationing.
No. And you see, we travel differently. That's all I'll say. We travel differently, not better, not worse. We travel differently. So there's a great benefit in flying the same airline. Don't care if it's the worst airline in the world. But if you fly the same airline, you know the geography of the airport. You know the geometry of the flight, the routine of it, when you're going to get served, what food you're going to get served, all that. And there's a great relaxation in familiarity.
You told me that when we were having tea. You said, you know, flying, I think, from Dubai to London, how long it takes to get up, how long you're in the air, how long you're down.
That trip back, I went Swiss to Zurich, and then United Zurich to New York, because I knew both flights. I knew what they were like. I had status on the airline, so I'm going to get a decent seat. But you look to that. nobody books my tickets, by the way. I mean,
Wow.
somebody physically might book them, but nobody chooses my flights for me. I will have gone on to Google Flights or Matrix IT software. I will have seen all the options. I will have worked out which is the most cost effective and which is that. And I will say, can you book this, this, and this?
Interesting. All right, I want to wrap with two questions. In sake of time, you can choose the length of answer. Number one, how much longer? Well, this is one part two. How much longer do you want to keep doing the travel and the quest on business? And if you were to stop, what would you do next?
Well, they're both very prescient questions as I'm 60 and just, and one's looking at what to do next. Questioning business is just delightful because it's an evening conversation, and it's been going now. In January it will be 15 years, and so there's a wonderfulness of having that eve. And I know there have been people watching it for all that time, and so that's great. The travel, it's still infectious, and it's not about this is a cutesy restaurant in Brooklyn that you want to go and visit. It's more about you're getting on a plane and going somewhere for an adventure.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it is this: if you ever watch a plane take off, all right, first of all, it's just magic. The thing flies. How does it do it? And no amount of explaining to me the air going over that way takes longer than that way, therefore it goes up. But more than that, think of all the people on board. Who's going for a new job? Who's just been fired? Who's going to bury a relative? Who's going to get married? Who's going for a birthday? Who's going to a loved one? Who's going to bury some? Every emotion of life, every facet of life is on that plane, in that metal tube. And the airline itself.
Yeah, wow.
Think about it. It has to get the right plane with the right people and the right crew with the right hours and the right luggage and the right meals at the right time. And it doesn't do it once. It has to do it hundreds of times a day.
Yeah.
Hundreds of times a day. And the slightest mishap, I mean, serious mishap will be disastrous, but even just late flights will cascade through the system. Lufthansa last week, with its technology problem. And bad weather.
Yeah.
And so travel both logistically,
The logistics,
financially, and emotionally is phenomenal.
It's interesting, the emotional side, because that's what comes across in Quests on Business and with you is the infectious, inquisitive interest.
Sure.
You're not faking or doing it as a job. It's a true inquisitive nature of the emotion of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that
I can sum it up as, oh, what happens if I push that button? That's it. Oh, that's interesting. Let's go and have a look. Oh, I didn't know that. What I don't like is pretentious artsy-fartsy crap. I don't like people. There are people who love good food. I'm not one of them. I mean, I like nice food. It doesn't particularly, I don't exalt over food. I eat to live, not the other way around. I don't drink alcohol, so wines are a bit of anymore. So wines are a bit of a mystery. But I always say my favorite words in the world: cabin crew, doors to automatic, because it means everyone's on board and we're on our way.
And you're taking off. Well, let's close with this and on our way. I'm not one that usually asks for predictions, but I'm quite curious when you talk about, we just came out of Davos, which is sometimes a bit of a pontification, session, but there were some real world things coming up this year. Richard, what do you think is going to happen in some of the areas that are out there now? Just pick one or two things that you believe this year is going to surprise us on.
Ukraine's going to get much worse.
Okay.
And it's going to go on for longer. And it's just going to be horrific. Horrific.
Wow.
Economically, we've probably got a couple more hiccups to go. Interest rates are going to go higher. Markets may or may not tumble again. It doesn't really matter. But by the end of this year, we should be seeing some solid reasons for more optimism going into next year. And some things will just keep going on and on and on. The EU with Poland and Hungary will just keep going on and on and on and on.
Very well. And with that, I'm going to close by saying thank you so much. And I hope you continue going on and on and on with everything that you're passionate about and everything that you do for CNN and the stories and the interviews and the CEOs and the world that you bring to light with your stories. I just want to say thank you for everybody who doesn't have a chance to tell you that.
Fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Quick question, Stephen.
Yes,
Do you
sir.
do much editing on it before it goes out?
I edit to where we smiled and I edit to the end. If there's something in the middle you want out, otherwise I edit right up to where we smiled and started and right there at the end.
No,
when we
you
say
didn't
thank
ask
you.
any personal questions. That was all.
Yeah, no, if there was anything in there you want, I tried not to ask anything personal or anything that would, offend you or the family or CNN or stuff
No,
like that.
no. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, it's up to you. If you're happy, I'm comfortable. Sometimes people, sometimes people throw the arrest question in, sometimes people all throw the gay question in. But if you're happy with neither of those, I'm happy with it. I'm happy with either of them.
No, I mean that stuff to me, like personal stuff to me is not interesting because just like you said, everybody on the plane has a story. Everybody has something personal.
Yeah,
To me,
the
I'm
only
much
thing I
more
would
interested
disagree.
in the journey
Actually,
of
the
yeah.
only thing I would disagree with on that is the gay question, because it's such an issue now.
You want to talk about it? If you do,
No,
tell me
it's
how
fine
you
not
want to
to.
frame the
It's fine
question.
not to. It's fine not to. It's fine not to. Fine not to.
Yeah, because I wouldn't, and I appreciate it. I wouldn't know how to ask a question. What would I say? What's it like being gay? Or when
No,
did you
I
know
think
you
the
were gay?
question
Or
is,
has the
I think the
industry
question would
changed?
have been, look, you're successful and you're gay. Has that been, do I view it differently now than I did when I was in my teens and 20s? And,
Interesting.
I'll give you an answer anyway, but I mean, I certainly do. If I think
Let
back
me
to
let me ask you then directly. When
Fine.
did you know that you were gay? When did you come out where other people know, and how did it affect you in the career early on?
I sort of realized sort of late teens, early 20s that I was gay, but I kept it pretty, I wasn't closeted, yes. I think I was always afraid. I was always afraid, not that the family would shun me and throw me overboard, which they didn't, of course, but that at work it would be, I've said before, I think I always feared you'd go to a place, a hurricane or whatever, and there'd only be one room left and you'd have to share it with a male colleague and they wouldn't want to because you're gay and they would think, oh, I'm not sharing, and those sort of things are deep down fears. Now,
Yeah.
with the wisdom of hindsight and a little bit of seniority, if that were to happen now and they didn't want to share, sleep on the other side of the bed, I'd say, well, there's the floor. Don't let me stop you. Make yourself comfy. Here's a pillow.
You would just deal with it and move on.
No, I just time to go and sleep on the floor.
Yeah.
That's your. But the point is, I think I look round today. I was walking through the office the other day, and there's a colleague, I don't even know who he really is, but he's got a picture of his boyfriend on his desk. And I just thought, that's magnificent.
Yeah.
Look, admittedly, I work in an industry where it's far more acceptable to be openly out. I understand that. But just seeing that is just tremendous, that people have moved on.
And so again, two questions. In the early part of your career, do you think it hindered? Did you have to keep it hidden? How do you think it impacted your career early on?
It didn't, because I just pushed it to one side. Just thought, it's not relevant. I don't want to. It could harm me. Of course, it didn't harm me.
Yeah.
It's never harmed me. And it wouldn't harm anybody now in any of the major broadcasting organizations.
Well, so then I'm going to ask a different question of harm, because the person you're talking about at work, I'm sure, is of a certain age to be working there. You knew at a more mature age of late teens. What are your thoughts on some of the gender, transgender, some of the things around the aspect of moving much younger into kids, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah. These are difficult questions that we have to face. Gender, the whole question of gender. Do I have the same difficulties or challenges of a 60-year-old having to face this? Absolutely, yes. I'm open-minded, of course, on it,
Yeah.
but I wasn't brought up with it. So I can sometimes sound very, very old-fashioned, but that's a production of age. And I have to force myself to recognize, no, Richard, that's not, things have moved on. You know, and it's all, as far as I'm concerned, as it relates to me, I always like to think of the fact that I'm gay is irrelevant to what I do.
Which is kind of why I didn't ask, but it was curious when you brought it up. Because
but growing up, and there are many people out there today who will think it is relevant.
Yes.
And will think so. So for me, the best thing is a kid says to his father or his mother, hey, do you know that Quest guy's gay? And they reply, oh, I don't care about that. I want to hear what he's saying about interest rates. I want to hear what he's saying about the dollar. I mean, I don't care what he does in his private life. Much more interesting. And that to me is the definition of success. That to me is, but I do now recognize that once you are successful, with that comes an element of responsibility and duty to, if you like, carry that success into these areas of your life.
And so this is again interesting, because for somebody out there going through something as a teenager, what would you say, or what?
It's not hell if you are living in metropolitan cities, working in media or fashion or whatever. But the person I think about is the kid in a village, in a rural part of some conservative country or conservative, and you know, we're talking about the US as much as anything else here.
Yeah.
The difficulties they will face, and no amount of, all they can do is to some extent hang on and look at those other people who've been there and done it and say, the water is okay. It might get a bit choppy, but it will be okay.
Wow. And so from that standpoint, then we can use you as a beacon of somebody who was, please. No, we're going to use you as a beacon of somebody that's been insecure in their career and done amazing, because people are insecure through life.
I have a duty to give back, pay it back. And that does involve now, I mean, I've no problem with marching under a pink flag at Pride, but I think one of the ways as well that people like myself in my position can do that is by being absolutely open and saying to people, you know, what I do in my private life is up to me, but it is.
And do you think there's, because I saw an interview with Caitlyn Jenner the other day, and she was saying some of the same things, that there's a difference between the responsibility of ownership and discretion versus the activism of people who are very activists without any of the responsibility.
You've got both. You need both. Without the activists, we would not have made the progress we made. There is more than, sometimes you need a bulldozer, sometimes you need, you know, a surgeon's drill. Sometimes you need to blow the door off. Other times you need to be very careful as you mold the future. It's not a one size fits all. It really isn't. So in my work, I can have private conversations with various leaders where I can make the point absolutely that their policies are unacceptable to me. And I can certainly do that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I get older, that is something I now believe is part of my responsibility. I am not going to walk on by. I'm just not.
Good for you. And how much of that are you allowed the freedom to do on the show?
Well, am I allowed to proselytize and campaign? No, of course not, any more than I would anywhere else. Well, I was coming out. All right, here's your last story. And then
Okay.
I'd been out for years, family, friends, everybody knew, but I'd never come out on TV. And then one year it's Pride weekend, and we'd had an author on, John Brown, Lord Brown, a former BP, about his book, and I did a big profitable moment at the end, and I was going to do, I'm gay, and blah, blah, blah. But in the end, I talked about how you are only your best when you are free to be who you want to be. I basically pulled the punch. I just absolutely did not do it. And I went home and I looked at myself that Pride weekend, and I talked to my then fiance. I said, look, I really messed that up. And so I've got to do it again. So I wrote to the boss, the EVP, and I said, listen, Tony, this is what I said. This is what I wanted to say. This is what I'm going to say on Monday, if you agree. And I sent him the new one, which basically said, I'm gay. It's helped me. It's hurt me. But this is how I want to look. And he just wrote back to me one line. This is what I'd hoped you were going to say on Friday.
Wow.
And when I did that on Quest Means Business that night, and said, good night, and did the bell, whatever you're up to in the hours ahead, I hope it's profitable. When I did that, the crew cheered. And
wow.
But what it taught me is that I may not have much influence or power, but I have some. And I'm going to use it where I can. Otherwise, it's a waste.
Good for you. And what year was that?
Oh, 14, 15. I can't remember. I can find out if it's really essential.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, again, it's been a treat when I see you globally, spending the time with you, and then this opportunity now. Thank you so much. Because again, I know you're super busy and you're normally on the other side of the camera. So the opportunity for me to have you on that side has been great. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Good.
Very cool.
Yeah, you see, it's a bit more interesting than me. It's what makes us tick these days. Good. Anything else I can do? Otherwise, I'll need to carry on with some.
Carry on, good sir. If you need me for anything, let me know. If this Kingdom of Saudi Arabia weekend goes well with KSA and MBS, and I get access to some people I think might be interesting for you. That was John Sutton, my friend you met in Davos.
Cool.
He's the one that set up the Saudi trip, so that should be pretty amazing. Be happy to see that.
Thank you very much.
All right, sir. Talk soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.